my name is Beck and welcome to my August wrap up. I have read 7 books this month and I'm just going to get right into them in a second, but if you see me wince throughout this video, I have my braces but I've also got a little sore in my mouth and it keeps catching on them and it's really painful. And I was going to put filming this video off, but I thought, well, it's basically the end of August, I've got a few days left and then the month is over, so why not film it now when I know I've only got a few days left and I know I'm not going to finish anything else. So let's just get into the books, and apologies in advance if I look like I'm suffering. The first book that I finished is a carryover from last month because I finished it in the first few days of August, and that is Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. This is the beginning of a fantasy quartet and it was 700 pages long and it's one of my new favourite series, I think. I ended up loving this. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's about a boy named Kieran to keep things simple, and he is a thief and he's trying to make a living for himself on the streets, save up enough money and then run away from the city that he lives in. But while he's doing that, he goes on a job and he accidentally attracts the attention of a royal house and also the attention of a demon, and from there things spiral out of control. And I only gave this a 4.5 stars instead of a 5 because a lot of this involved mental gymnastics. There is magical artifacts in here, there is a prophecy in here, so it had awesome tropes that I loved and it conveyed them in new and unique ways, and with characters that I really enjoyed the tone and the voice of. But when it came to all of the naming and all of the royal houses, that's where I got tripped up, because there is doppelgangers and body swapping, there is a demonic shapeshifter in here as well to add things to the mix. So when I was reading this, I really had to turn my brain on and focus and then pause and backtrack and slot pieces into place and then continue reading. So because of that, I think I would have struggled with the audiobook because names tend to fall out of my head with audiobooks. But when I read this physically, it really helped, but I did have to do a lot of mental gymnastics, like I said. So just be aware of that going in, but don't let it intimidate you by the length, just with the different names. Because when I read this, I really connected to Kieran's tone and I really enjoyed it and laughed out loud at quite a few places as well, and was taken aback by how dark it was, but it was also done in an incredible way. And while I was reading this, I went out and purchased the second book, which has since arrived, and I've been putting off reading it because I've had other things to do. So I'm really hoping that I can get to this sequel in the following month in September. So cross all of your fingers for me because I have an undertaking of a September TBR. I also forgot to mention that the narrative technique in here was really unique as well, in the sense that there were different perspectives shifting, but there was also a scholar and he was focused on the two characters, Kieran and Talon, in the story, and they are in jail cells. Talon is watching over Kieran. Talon's not a good person. She's the demonic shapeshifter, and they are recounting their story, and so as the reader you are experiencing their story back and forward in different timelines, and then you're also reading the footnotes because the scholar is narrating things. And I thought that would be very confusing, but it was actually the opposite. It was very captivating, and that's why I'm so impressed by it. And then I participated in the magical readathon and I ended up finishing that readathon, which I was very impressed with. Ow. And so for that readathon, to start off with, I finished Legends and Lattes. If you want to check out my reading vlog for all of the different prompts and everything, I will link it for you, but this is just me wrapping up the books I read. So Legends and Lattes is a very hyped up popular read on BookTube at the moment, and I thought, why not jump on the bandwagon and try it out. It's about 300 pages or less, so super doable, super easy to get into. But because I read this straight after reading Ruin of Kings, I really worried that I wasn't connecting to the first like 60 or so pages, but after that it really just takes off because it's introducing everything to you slowly. So this follows a character named Viv, and she's an orc, and she doesn't want to be a murderer or a mercenary anymore, and so she's like, I'm gonna take all of my bounties and then buy a cafe and start a cafe. And no one in this world has heard of coffee before, but when she was on some bounty far away, she went into a cafe run by gnomes and tasted coffee for the first time, and she's like, my vision is to open a coffee shop. So it's a really quiet story with different characters interweaving, and I found that it was just quite warm and it really just took up residence in my heart, for lack of a better terminology. It was just really lovely to experience, and while I understood this as marketed for the romance, because there's 2 characters on here, there is a female-female romance, but that's not what really pushed the story forward. That kind of happened more towards the middle and end as like an afterthought rather than being the main focus. If you want something sapphic, yes, definitely tried this, but it doesn't focus necessarily only on the romance. It focuses on found family and friendship first. So I loved both of those things. I loved this entire story, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read an adult sci-fi novella, and that was by John Scalzi. I've never touched John Scalzi's work before, so I thought I'd try it and jump in. The Kaiju Preservation Society was described to me as Pacific Rim meets Jurassic Park, and I say that's pretty accurate. It's about a guy named Jamie, and it's set in 2020. The pandemic has just started, so it is a modern world sci-fi with the pandemic mentioned. And then Jamie loses his job. He's an artist, and he's delivering food for like a version of Uber Eats, and he runs into this old friend named Tam, and Tam and him used to go to school together, and Tam's like, we actually just had a job opening, why don't you come and join? And after that, I don't want to spoil anything because it is quite short, and I feel like that's enough of a synopsis to kind of understand where it's going. So I liked this. It was fast paced. It was like reading an action movie. When it came to the different characters, I wasn't particularly invested in them in terms of emotion, but I was interested in the plot and what was occurring. So I gave it a 4. It was really enjoyable. I couldn't put it down because it was really just short, quick, and easy to read. There were a few moments in here that felt repetitive with Jamie's voice, but ultimately I enjoyed myself and I had a great time. And then I finally read one that I have been really on the fence about reading for a good reason, because I gave it about a 3 stars. But this is Dark One by Brandon Sanderson, and it's a comic book that follows Paul, who is a prophesized Dark One, and it deals in alternate universes. So Paul is in our world in Chicago, I think from memory, and he crosses over or gets callings or visions from a different world that's like a fantasy world. And so in that fantasy world, he's prophesized as the Dark One. In the real world, no one has any idea who he is. So I found this intriguing and interesting in terms of the tone, because I actually laughed out loud at a few different parts, which really surprised me about a Brandon Sanderson graphic novel, because I've read White Sand and I didn't really feel that connection to it. In this, the character of Paul really came to the forefront and it felt a bit more visceral to me, whereas White Sand just felt a bit flat. But when I read the prose version of White Sand, I enjoyed it a lot more. So when it came to this one, it felt like it had more shape. But then when I thought about the plot, it went back and forth, the pace felt up and down. So there's still a few things in my opinion that need ironing out that aren't quite right yet, but it has taken leaps and bounds forward since what my experience was in White Sand. So while I enjoyed this, I likely won't be continuing this series, because I did check and it does have a 1 on the spine, so it does continue, and it ended on a cliffhanger anyway. So I figured after reading that, I was like, oh, it's not a standalone. It does continue, and I'm not shelling out $40+ a volume for these hardcovers, so it's just not worth it. But it was okay. I'm glad I didn't dislike it, because that was what I was worried about, and ultimately I'm just glad I finished it. And then I read a young adult post-apocalyptic book, and that is all that's left in the world. I ended up wanting more from this than what it gave me, and so I only gave it about a 3 stars as well. I started the magical readathon really strong with Legends and Lattes, and then it kind of went like this and then just coasted. So this was a story about Andrew and Jamie, and if you're, again, like Legends and Lattes, reading this for the queer romance, it's not something that's the focus of the story until more towards the ending. And I didn't like certain things about this, but overall it was just okay. I think in terms of the different apocalyptic tropes in here, I enjoyed the potential of them, but the execution of them didn't really capture me. I don't want to say anything too specific, otherwise obviously I'll spoil the natural beats of the story, but it just felt okay to me. I did like the banter between Andrew and Jamie, that was great, and I liked their introspection and their character development and the risks they went up towards together, but beyond that I don't really care for it, honestly, and I think after this video I'm probably going to unhaul this. Not because I actively dislike it, obviously, just because I know that I'm never going to touch it again. I'm probably not going to talk about it too much because it was just kind of a middle of the road book for me, but again, it's a post-apocalyptic queer book and I thought, why not give it a try, and now I have. And then August was a pretty rough month for me, so I didn't do a lot of reading for a fairly big chunk of it. So towards the end is when my reading starts to thin out. You'll notice that I started pretty strong with a few different books and novellas, but now you get to this end of the video and I'm like, I have a graphic novel and a very short book next. And the graphic novel is Aquacon Cove, and this is by the same author who wrote the Tea Dragon Society, which I absolutely adored. Aquacon Cove has a character in it whose mother has passed away and whose father is trying to do right by her and takes her to visit her aunt by the ocean. And for me, the characters in the Tea Dragon Society, I'm always going to compare them because that's the work of theirs that is my favourite. But the Tea Dragon Society had such strong characters as well as strong messages. But this one to me had strong messages and not as strong characters, even though I liked both things. So I still love the Tea Dragon Society. It is one of my all-time favourites of this year and just ever. And this one got a 4 stars from me. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't a new favourite. And I would recommend it because it was just wholesome as their work tends to be. And I really enjoyed the art style as well. So I liked the different messages in here, but I feel like the Tea Dragon Society just had the full kind of feeling and image, whereas this was just a little bit short for me. So I would rank this a little bit below Tea Dragon Society, but I still recommend it. And then finally, I continued with a series that I have been meaning to continue all year, and that is Magic Burns, which is the second book in the Alona Andrews, Kate Daniels series. Oh my goodness, I finally read this, and like I said at the beginning of my video, I started strong on the Magical Readathon and then just kind of coasted, but I went like slightly up at the end because this is a 3.5 stars. I couldn't quite give it a 4 because there were some things I disagreed with in this book, but I did like certain aspects of it. And again, for some reason, I'm just a disconnect with characters lately. The characters in here, while they interested me, when the stakes were high, I wasn't particularly emotional, I was just interested. So I want that to be stronger and make me feel more tension in the next books, because I do plan on continuing this. I enjoyed it. I loved the last page. There was just some nice moments of character in here that hooked me enough to keep me interested, and so obviously I'm going to continue. This is essentially about magic going wrong, and in this urban fantasy world, it's set in Atlanta, but there is technology and magic and they shift on and off. So whenever technology shuts down, you can't use your phone or the internet anymore, and so they have different modes of transportation like horses. They've got different aspects of light that involve magic. So I really like that world building element and how it all ties into the supernatural creatures and Kate's abilities. I really love that about this. I feel like that's very fleshed out and I really appreciate and I'm intrigued by it. But when it came to the different elements of the story and Kate's relationships to different people, some parts I just did not care about whatsoever, and some parts were feeling like an overreaction when initially the characters that she connected with didn't feel like they were that significant. So I can be very specific. I will put a spoilers tag on the screen. I'll be spoiling the ending for a particular character, but not the ending overall. So there was a character in here that was called the Hound, and he tended to appear and then disappear throughout the book, and I didn't really get his significance. It became more apparent towards the end for obvious reasons, but when he appeared once, he just kissed her and then left, and to me that's assault. Like, it's an unsolicited kiss. She didn't enjoy it, and then later on at the end when he died, she was very cut up about it, and I thought, you guys aren't really friends even, so why are you having such a deep emotional reaction to this? It could have been because she has been on her own for a very long time, and so she feels a deeper connection to someone who just showed her a little bit of attention because she's not let herself form those bonds with different people. But anyway, all of that aside, I enjoyed this for what it was, and I'm interested in reading more about this urban fantasy world that is built in a way that I've not seen any urban fantasies built before. Like, the magic and technology shift is really awesome, and I quite liked Curran, one of the shapeshifters in here. There were some things that I was like, oh, because whenever there are shifters in a story, like shapeshifters, there's always that whole alpha nonsense of posturing and violence, and it can get a little bit old, but I think it's handled well in this series, at least what I've seen so far for the most part. So again, I'm looking forward to continuing eventually when I get the chance to, because I don't actually own the sequel yet. And then I'm still currently reading a few things. So the audiobook I'm currently reading is Iron Gold by, I almost said Brandon Sanderson, I don't know what's wrong with my brain, by Pierce Brown. And this is the 4th book in the Red Rising series. It is a jump from the Morningstar book, which is book 3. It's about a 10-year time skip. And so you follow different characters when they're a little bit older and new characters that are introduced in here as well. And I like the different facets of this story, but it feels very detailed and rough, rough in just the sense that it's dark and unforgiving, and given the things that I was dealing with in my personal life during August, I was like, I don't have the brain capacity to take on, remember and understand this book. So I'm only very barely into the beginning. I'm a couple of chapters in. So I've actually been avoiding this book. But I think I have enough energy again to actually get into it, because I've just been watching YouTube videos on my break at work instead of reading my audiobook like I usually would. So that has put me behind significantly. Usually I would be at least halfway, if not further by now. But I do genuinely enjoy these works. I just need to have the attention span for them. So I will be continuing this during the month of September behind my other massive reads on that TBR, but we won't talk about those. And instead we're going to talk about what I'm physically reading, and that is Her Majesty's Royal Coven. And this came out in August at the very beginning, and I stopped and started this because I wanted to read my magical books, and I've got like, I don't know, 20 pages into this, really not very far at all, but the writing is actually quite big, like the font I mean, so I think I can smash this if I just give myself a moment to actually make time and sit down, because that is a struggle. So I aim to have this finished very early in September, so cross your fingers that that happens. But that is it for what I've read during August. Let me know how many books you've read. I have read 7. I'm obviously currently reading 2, and I have big plans and big ambitions for September. But I'm also moving house then, so no pressure. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll put some more stuff on the screen that I think you should have a look at, but thank you again for watching this video. I'll talk to you down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.